Welcome back to the Love Your Work Festival. My name's Chris Lukianenko, the Content Marketing Manager here at LiveTiles, and with me is Simon Tyrrell, the Chief Strategic Officer. And we're going to have a bit of a chat about design thinking. Simon, I know you're a massive fan of design thinking.
Massive.
Why are you?
Look, it's because I've seen the impact it has, whether it be in our own organisation, organisations we've done it with in the past, but also with kids and students in the educational setting. It's I think it's a way of approaching problem solving and sort of innovation, as the trendy term is, from a basis of what's actually really important, as opposed to just some framework or process you follow the bouncing ball on. Design thinking can be a problem when it's done like that, but if you boil it down to its bare essentials, it's actually just a really powerful way to look at something and go, what is it we're trying to solve here? Who are we trying to solve it for? And then as quickly as possible, coming up with potential ways you could solve it and validating whether that'd do. And if you think about that application, can save a whole bunch of time, right? And I look at projects that happen in organisations and how much time is spent, defining requirements and scope and etc. before anyone's actually asked the basic question of what is the actual problem? Why are we doing this? And, as I said, who are we doing it for? The most important question is, who are we doing this for? Because if you don't know that, how do you validate whether the thing you've just spent 12 months doing is actually going to work? And, I'd honestly believe if organisations adopted this a bit more, they'd save a lot of time, a lot of money, and deliver much better outcomes for their workforce.
So, mate, this seems like it's a pretty new sort of idea, is it? Or?
Well, no. Actually, it's been around for over 3 decades, over 30 years, when it was first sort of coined, the phrase design thinking. And I think the reason you're hearing so much about it now, it's sort of a logical extension of what Agile's try to be in software development, that type of thing. And, organisations are being told, be more innovative, whatever that means, be more agile, right? And so they're looking for things they can adopt that do that. And design thinking is this thing that sort of emerged as a way to do it. Unfortunately, a lot of organisations, a lot of people are getting it completely wrong. They're assuming it's a process they have to follow, and they go looking online and they find the latest fancy diagram from the latest experts. They download the latest templates and they go, right, if we do this or read this book, we'll be able to achieve a really good outcome. And they just don't. And I see it time and time again, the same mistakes being made. And so what the smart organisations are realising is that it isn't rocket science, but what you actually need to do is to change the mindset. And you need to give people the ability to have that mindset shift in an organisation. And if you do that, then all of a sudden you unlock this level of creative thinking that, unfortunately, in most of our workplaces for the last 20 years has been smashed out of us, right? Analytical thought, computational thinking, KPI-driven decision-making. It's really all sort of boiled up to stop people being playful and imaginative, which breeds creativity.
Yep.
And I think in the last 12 months of what's been a pretty bad year, you've seen this really come to the fore with a lot of organisations where they haven't had a choice, so they've had to allow people to look at, how do we do this process now? How do we deal with this? And there's been no excuses anymore. And so it's really unlocked that level of creativity and imagination that I think a lot of organisations are now realising is exceptionally powerful. It just happens to be a really good way to engage your people,
yep.
Right? And to involve people in coming up with ideas and decision-making or redefining processes, whatever it may be, from a broad range of people in your organisation, not just the experts anymore. And that's where I think it really, really makes a difference in the workplace.
Pretty simple process, very engaging. Can you teach us how to do it in about 15 minutes?
Well, I can. It just so happens we've pulled together some videos, and what we've tried to do here is really, this is how I present this if I'm doing something in person, right? And I've done this for 10 years, sort of walking people through the process, everything from executives in big companies through to primary school kids and teachers and even marketing folk. And so what I've tried to do here is capture the bare essentials in true design thinking style. I've made it really simple. I'm on a whiteboard, which is one of the key tools in all of this. So hopefully it's useful to the audience. And we'll drop in a bit way through, explain some of the areas where you might struggle, and also at the end give you some examples and sort of why, just why this is important.
So we'll throw it over to Simon and his whiteboard marker, and then we'll come back and have a chat afterwards.
Design thinking is a process, and there's a whole bunch of different variations on the same theme. The one here is the one that we've started to use at LiveTiles over the course of many years of running it through our product and organisational design activities. So let's quickly touch on it, and we'll go into detail of each step. So the first one is understand, and that's really about having empathy for the problem and the people with that problem. Getting deep into it to understand their motivations, what they need out, their expectations, etc. Once we have a good understanding, we need to generate as many ideas as we possibly can, and that's high energy, it's fun, and we'll explain that in a little bit more detail later. Then select. You can't do everything. You've got constraints. So which one are we going to have a go at? Which one do we think best meets the needs of those users from our understanding phase? Then we need to prototype that, and there's a whole bunch of different ways of prototyping. We're not looking for a final solution here. We're looking to get the minimal viable thing we can to validate with those users, do we solve your problem? If not, guess what? We iterate back through it, and we'll explain that in a bit more detail as well. The key thing you need to do before you kick off your day is to frame the problem that you're looking to try and solve through this design thinking process. So the trick here is to not be prescriptive. You want to set a challenge, as we call it, or your problem, as broadly as possible. You don't want to be assuming an outcome. So for example, let's take students in a classroom. We might do something like improve the classroom experience. Now what we don't want to do necessarily is say use technology to improve the classroom experience or change the physical classroom, because we may not go there. We're presuming an outcome there. Now in some cases that makes sense. For example, in our world we have to build digital software products, so most of our challenges will be around our product or a potentially future product. But if you're looking just to try and get some really innovative thinking around a particular problem area, try and keep it as high level as you can, and then allow people to work out what possible ways could we improve the classroom experience, for example. Once you've got your problem framed, on the day, write it up on a whiteboard in big letters so everybody can see it and refer back to it, and always keep people coming back to, but are we improving the classroom experience? And that way you can try and use your challenge statement to just keep people in line to say, well, we're not really doing that, are we? Or the problems we've identified our users are having have nothing to do with the classroom experience, as an example. So try not to be too prescriptive, and don't assume solutions before you actually get through the process. So the first step in the design thinking process that we do here in LiveTiles is what we call understand or understanding. So the purpose of this step is to gain an insight into the problem that you're trying to solve and the people who have that problem. So it could be users, stakeholders, whatever. The key part of this is not so much the steps or tools you might use, it's to gain a very simple and very powerful thing, and that is empathy. If I just design for me, I'm designing for one person. So I'm trying to gain an insight into the motivations, the needs, the problems that the users I'm trying to come up with a solution for have. And to do that, I've simply got to get empathy. The other really powerful thing about this is trying to limit the impact that your bias has. Now, we're all human, we all have our own perspectives, our own thoughts, etc. And the key part of a design process is to try and put that as much as you can to one side and limit its impact on your decision-making process. Okay, so how can we try and gain some empathy for our users in the problem area we're looking at? Well, there's a few different techniques. We can observe them. Simple observation of how they might use a piece of furniture could give us insights into how we should design a desk, for example. We can interview. Very, very common technique. Just make sure you think about what makes a good interview. Open questions, no yes, no type answers, etc. And try and make your questions as non-biased as you possibly can. We might use surveys, particularly useful if you want to try and get a broad range of insights. We might research. What other things are out there that these users might use or interact with that can inform some understanding of what they like or dislike about that experience, etc. All of these techniques are simply a way of trying to put aside our bias as individuals or as a team and get an insight into what the users can tell us through an understanding. So what can we then do with this information. Empathy maps, a really powerful way, high level, of trying to understand the wants, needs, etc. of the people you're understanding in your research techniques. We might do a user journey, which is very, very powerful when you're trying to understand the end-to-end of a process, such as a buying process on a website, or it might be a process within an organisation for, say, expense claims. And then a really one we like to use is persona profiles. A little bit overdone at times, but it's a really nice way to introduce people to putting themselves in someone else's shoes, and you can have some fun with it and, you know, create a character, if you will. So, to sum it all up, the understand step is where you start. It's to gain empathy for your users or the stakeholders in the problem area you're looking to address. And the key part of all of this is to try and limit your own bias on your decision making down the track. So you've got a good understanding of your users and you're now getting really excited because you're already thinking about all the solutions you could give them. Stop! You don't have solutions yet. In fact, what we now go into is the generate phase. This is the high energy, fun part of the day where you really try and get as many ideas as possible out. And what you're trying to uncover here is those gems that you would never have got to if you'd just gone straight to a solution. So let's talk about firstly why this is so important, and then we'll talk about the techniques. So let's imagine we have a line here. And at the left-hand end of the line is what's safe, what we call the safe zone. What you could do today, it's a type of ideas that people will go to straight away because they're all within the realm of possibility. And at the other end, let's go to what we call the crazy zone. This is the stuff that's way, way out there. To be honest, completely impractical, or if not impossible to achieve. But what we want to do in the generate phase is we want to try and get our ideas as far along here as possible. Because if we can get there with our creative thinking, the things we're likely to try and have a go at, they still might be back here, but they're going to be a far way along the line to the true innovative type of thing than if we just stay back in our comfort zone. So that's why we do it. How do we do it? So what we need here is our old friend, the Post-it note, and its colleague, the Sharpie. Now we tell people in this case to use a Sharpie. What you want you to do is to really commit to your ideas. Hence, permanent pen, not a pencil, can't be erased, can't be removed from existence. And it's a pretty simple technique that we do. We suggest you have 15 minutes. So get your timer and set it for 15 minutes. And what you challenge your teams to do is 50 ideas. Sounds like a lot, and it is, but give people a challenge. Tell them to really go out there and go as far to that crazy zone as they possibly can. So everyone gets a pack of Post-its and a Sharpie. People should be in their teams of about 4, 5, possibly 6 individuals, and they're on a piece of wall. Could be a whiteboard, could be a window, could be a wall, doesn't matter, just as long as there's plenty of space. They should be standing, not sitting. If people do this sitting, it will not work. They'll slump, they'll lose energy. This is a high energy activity. So everyone on their feet, have the music cranking, and then get everyone to go now and start your timer. And basically what you want to do, I don't want to be doing this. I've got an idea, write down my idea. Notice what happened there. I immediately closed myself off. I went into my own zone and I'm thinking too deeply about it. That comes later. So rather what we want to do is if someone else has an idea, they yell it out. I capture it. Yep, I've got that down. I write it down as quickly as possible on my Post-it note and I simply grab it, rip it off, bang it on the wall. Bang it on the wall for a reason. Makes a noise, wakes people up. Okay, keeps that energy high. So very simple. Post-it, Sharpie, yell out ideas, someone captures them and put them up on the wall. Don't worry about lining them up. Don't worry about grouping them yet. We do that later. This is all about getting as many wonderful Post-it notes as we can with ideas for how we'll help solve the problem for our users as quickly as possible.
So I've just seen the generate phase there with Simon and his whiteboard. Mate, coming up with ideas, it seems pretty simple.
Yeah, you'd think so, wouldn't you? Unfortunately, this is where we see a lot of organisations really struggle. You know, if I think about where the main mistakes are made, as I said earlier, right, one is just not having the mindset, like going into that understand sort of part of the process and thinking you've got all the answers, going straight into solution mode, which is it's intrinsic in what we do, right? It's that analytical thinking coming in. So that's the first mistake. But if you get past that, it's when you hit generate. And unfortunately, most of us as adults, it's been beaten out of us, I would argue, that, don't think crazy, don't think big. How many times, Chris, have you heard big thinkers referred to as blue sky and, they're the entrepreneur types? But yet, if you look at kids and how they learn and how they think about the world, the imagination, the playfulness, the anything's possible mindset that they have, that's what we're trying to unlock here. And, when we do this with primary school kids, they have no problems with it. When we do it with a bunch of highly trained, highly educated professionals, they are terrible at it. And it's just because that it's not a muscle in many ways, right, that they've exercised. So being able to unlock that part of your brain, which is, why little things that might sound really sort of, bit gimmicky, like moving, having music playing, having noise and generating some buzz, are actually cognitively very important. They're releasing those chemicals into your brain that, very much like exercise does, right? We know that's good for us. We know that allows us to de-stress and to think a bit differently. We need to do the same thing here. So, while it sounds gimmicky, that's really important. The next thing that happens, though, if you're doing this really well and you're generating a bunch of ideas and those post-it notes are slapping everywhere and everyone's going well, is your brain explodes, right? And it's about 6 to 7 minutes in, we find, is this where this starts to happen. And what basically appears to be going on here is that, imagine you're looking at this wall or this whiteboard full of coloured post-it notes and you've got a whole bunch of them. You basically start to subconsciously go, this is too much. I just can't take this in. And the analytical side of your brain is constantly going, but I want to dive deeper into that. I want to think more about that. Is that really possible? Could I get budget for that? That type of thing. What would the business case be? And that comes later, as we'll see. And so subconsciously you go too much and you start to just stop. And you can tell this is happening in a group when you start to see this going on, or drop shoulders, or people who have been standing and interacting start to sit down. Basically, the energy dies, right? And noise stops. But there is a way around this, and it's a little technique we call the Zoom method. And basically what we try to do is take away that brain imploding level of noise and give you some focus back. And so what we recommend you do is you pick up one of those post-it notes, right? And it might be a sort of an idea or a theme of ideas you're getting excited about as a group. And you isolate it visually. Take it to another whiteboard, another wall, or even, put it on the back of a flipboard that you might be using, whatever it may be. And then set your group the challenge of, for the next 60 seconds, 5 ideas around that topic. All right. And all of a sudden your brain goes from too much, I'm being overloaded, to, okay, I'm dealing with one thing. And you get that creative juice flowing again. Now, Chris, if you think about it, if you did that 5 times with 5 different ideas or themes, you've got 25 new ideas in 5 minutes.
Yep.
Right. So it's a really, really powerful technique. And often what we'll find is the best ideas that organizations or groups proceed with come out of that little section. So 6 to 7, sometimes 8 minutes in of that 15-minute power session. If you're starting to find you're struggling, isolate an area you think's a good one, hone in on that, then do it again, and before you know it, you've got a bunch of new ideas, which are, and your brain hasn't exploded on you, which is probably a good thing.
Nice. All right, there's a few more steps to go in the process, so we'll throw back to the video.
So you've had some fun in the generate phase, you've got all these awesome ideas, but now it's time for reality to set in. We don't have unlimited time, budget, or people, so we are constrained. So what we now need to do is choose something. So the first thing we do is we start to look for common themes in these ideas. So for example, I can start to group them together just by simply sticking them around the same area. So I can start to see what are the common sorts of things we've thought that we could solve. And very quickly you start to see a really, really common stream of ideas coming out. And that's probably the best place you're going to start. But keep going back to that original step of your understanding of your users. Will this really address their problems? Does it go far enough in its creativity to really wow them and excite them, etc.? If not, look for something else. Never throw out ideas. We might think this is a bad idea today, but you never know. So just put those off to one side. Don't throw it out. Take a photo of your post-it so you've got that digital imprint of everything there just in case you lose stuff. Then once you have your grouped ideas, isolate them. Move everything out so you're not being distracted. Don't throw them out. And then this is what we're going to take through to the next stage. So we've prioritised what we're going to spend our time on prototyping. So what is a prototype? Well, it's basically a representation of what the final solution might be. And the trick here is not to waste time trying to get too perfect. We yet don't know if the thing we're thinking will solve the problem actually does. So we need to do the minimal possible to get something that we can validate with a user base. Now, a prototype can be anything. Everyone always thinks about it as, say, a digital product, so a set of wireframes or mock-ups for an app or a website, etc. But a prototype can be just about anything and for any purpose. So, for example, our good old friend Lego is a fantastic and fun way of prototyping a physical space. The layout, the proportions, that type of thing can be used for all sorts of stuff. Of course, paper is key to this. Now, that might be, we might sketch, such as a mock-up on here or a wireframe of a digital product, but this could be a process flow. This could be a storyboard telling the story of how a process change might improve the employee experience, for example. You can use cardboard, you can use Play-Doh, you can use clay. Basically, whatever you've got that will allow you to form something that you can put in front of somebody else and get them to understand the proposition of your solution for their problem. So, keep it as simple as you can, do it as fast as you can. In terms of how you best do this in the process, once again, plan ahead. Make sure you've got all the materials that you think people might need. So if you know the problem space you're looking at is a digital product, lots of paper, pencils, so people don't feel afraid to make mistakes. They can get their eraser out, rub it out and start again. If you think it might be a physical type environment, have Play-Doh, Lego, boxes, old furniture, whatever you think they may need. Just make sure you've got it on hand so you're not wasting time trying to track it all down. And then encourage people to spend the first 5 minutes of this phase just getting what's in their head out onto paper or onto something, and then talk about it in their groups and then iterate from there. And that's the key thing. Constant talking, discussion and iteration, as opposed to spending 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 2 hours, whatever, deep diving too much into something with only one perspective. So encourage them to keep sharing their ideas, keep gaining some validation throughout, and then when they think they've got something, get them to move into the next step, which is to validate it with some users. So you've got your prototypes, and you think it's time to go and work out if you're on the right track. That's where the validation step comes in. So what we're looking to do is testing. But you can do this in so many different ways, and the trick once again is to do what you can in the time you've got. So that might be as simple as present back to the group. Okay, just show it to them. Show it to a bunch of people who have been involved in the process and see what they think. Once again, you want to make sure you're relating it back to that very first step of understanding your users, because if it's not being linked back to their problems, their needs, then you're not really presenting your solution in that context. Of course, if you've got more time, you can actually go out and find some of those users and put your prototype in their hands. Now, once again, if you're going to do that, you can't lead them. So you need to be able to give them a prototype that's sufficiently detailed enough that you can get the insights you want. So for example, if that was a digital product like an app, for example, it's probably best to give it to them in some form that's on a phone so that you can see that it works in that context. If it's something that they're going to be using on the move, you obviously want users using it while they're doing something as opposed to sitting in a room where they can really concentrate. If it's something like a physical space, you obviously want to be able to have them come into that space and experience the layout, whatever it may be. So just think through a little bit about what's the best way we're going to get insights, and the answer to the question, does it work? Does the thing we're proposing we invest more time and effort on out of our prototypes actually start to solve the problem for our users? The answer may be no, and that's okay, because at least we haven't wasted weeks or months worth of effort to learn that. If we find out, yes, it is working, we can then do the whole process again if we wish and go to that next level of detail, or that's when we might go into a more formal product design, solution design type process and start to flesh out the details around it to get to a more higher fidelity prototype.
So there you go. That is the whole design thinking process. You've had that in a nutshell in about 15 minutes. Pretty
Easy.
awesome. Yeah,
Easy.
It's unreal. So everything we've seen here on this video, mate, is all in person. What's it like doing this thing, virtually?
Yeah, it's a really good question, right? Because clearly, in the last year, saying, hey, let's all get together in the same room and start slapping Post-it notes on a whiteboard hasn't been practical, right? And for many parts of the world, unfortunately right now, that's still the case. So it is absolutely possible to do this virtually. During the last 10 or so months, I've actually run sessions like this for leaders programs. I've run it for students. I've run it ourselves internally. There's no doubt it is harder. It's particularly harder to keep the energy going. Yep. So my advice here would be make sure you're set up well for it. And you can do this in Teams. You can do it with Zoom. The best way to think about this is set up breakout rooms or breakout channels, that type of setup, just so you've got the ability for your groups or teams to separate out. Allow people to have both the live online and the offline working patterns, right? So if they're going to go and do some prototyping, they don't have to do that all online, right? You can do a quick breakout. People can go and do some sketching for 30 minutes or so, then come back together is really important. And it's really, I guess, the person facilitating, just be aware of the energy in a group or a team. You're there to sort of jump back in. So, jump into those breakout rooms, for example, and sort of just ask a few questions, see how they're going. But, it is harder, but there's no doubt it's absolutely possible. I have a really good digital whiteboarding tool. The two Miro are two leaders in it, right? They're collaborative. They're easy to get up and going. You can do Post-it notes virtually with them and sort of try and mimic some of that atmosphere you get. So it shouldn't be an excuse not to do this. And, there's a lot of experts in the media right now saying, collaboration can only happen face-to-face. I think it's a load of crap, to be honest. There's no doubt it's a different style, but you can still achieve this. And I'd encourage you just to give it a go. And if doing it virtually means you can scale quicker to give it a go while you're still not all back in the office, start doing it. And guess what? When you get back in the office, keep it going, right? And you'll see that that muscle starts getting worked more. You'll just get better and better at it.
Tell us about where you've actually seen this, make a difference in your experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we use it all the time within the product teams of LiveTiles, but I think the most impactful is when I've seen this done with students.
Yep.
And the impact it can have, as well as with teachers. But there's a few examples that come to mind. I think of some kids from a really underprivileged background in New York, came from some gangland backgrounds, and I remember a kid there who came up, pitched this app idea at the end of a day with us, and his mother was in tears, just with how proud she was with what he'd come up with. I think about some kids in Los Angeles at Fox Studios. We were literally, Chris, in the tower from Die Hard, which is itself pretty cool. But we had kids from Orange County, film students, but what they were looking at is how they could address the need for an executive vice president and production for a production company. And this woman had worked on The Revenant, and we actually had the scripts of those movies. And what they're actually helping her solve is movie production logistics issues. And because she had a bunch of problems, it was all paper-based. And those kids came up with some phenomenal ideas. But I think the one that really hits home is we actually teach courses with some local high schools here in Hobart. And there was a bunch of grade 10 kids that were doing actually a work placement with us. And they were given the challenge to do something around addressing issues with disabilities. And it really showed the process and why it's so powerful. So these kids started with a bunch of assumptions and bias, right? And I remember they'd sort of spent a day together working through what they were going to do, and they presented to me one afternoon, and it was just terrible, right? It was full of their own bias. It was full of assumptions, no research, etc. And I ripped them to shreds, right, and just told them it wasn't good enough. But they didn't give up. What they did is they said, okay, you're right. We didn't actually understand the problem here properly.
Yep. And
they went back to the drawing board, and where they landed up literally a couple of days' effort later is they focused on upper mobility disability. And it came about through somebody one of them knew who had this issue they were dealing with. And where they then went was, people with upper mobility disability really struggle to cook for themselves, is what they witnessed. And so they went and observed this person. They spoke to this person, speaking, through those sort of understanding techniques. They did some research online. They spoke to some people in disability care about it. And they started going down this path of redesigning the oven, right? It was going to be a big topic for them to take on, and very, very costly. But somewhere through the process of generating ideas, they actually pivoted. And it was, I think, a brilliant moment where they actually said, well, actually, is the oven the problem here? And they started to look at the preparation of meals. And then they started to look at the fridge. And they actually did some experience observation where they actually observed how this person went about their life in the kitchen. Then they went and mimicked that. They actually constrained their arms so they couldn't move them very much and tried to make a meal. And they immediately ran into this issue of getting ingredients, particularly fresh ingredients from the fridge. And so anyway, cut a long story short, where they landed on was reconceptualizing a fridge into something where you could tell it what you were after and it would be able to deliver the ingredients to you at an accessible point, particularly height. It was a vending machine. They literally applied vending machine principles to how a fridge could be redesigned, right? And if you imagine that the end result they pitched was this idea of saying, I want to make a spaghetti bolognese, for example. And this new type of fridge will be able to get you the mince, get you all this, the canned tomatoes, whatever it was, or the pasta sauce, and deliver it to you at a height where you didn't have to struggle to get to it.
Yep.
And they presented it back to the person they knew, who was just blown away that somebody had even considered that that's where the problem started. How do I even get the ingredients before I even get to cooking? And it was really powerful to see these kids who none of them suffered from a disability of any type. They weren't tech kids. They weren't particularly strong learners in the classroom. But because they'd taken the time, followed the process, removed or at least limited their own bias on what they assumed the problem was, it was just, when they finally presented it to me, I was just blown away, right? It was just like, wow, that's a really, really simple answer to a very, very complex problem that could, if followed through, greatly impact somebody's life.
Yeah, so. What a great story. What a great story. So let's wrap this whole thing up. Obviously, this is the Love Your Work Festival. Can design thinking help us love our work?
I truly think it can, for a bunch of reasons, which I sort of alluded to at the start. But, I think one of the big things it does is a way to engage people, right? It's just so the antithesis of work that we're all used to. Right or wrong, yes, no. Give me the detail before we make a decision, right? So it can really disrupt the normal work patterns. And that's also very powerful to get people to know how to work together. So we, during COVID, when we were in lockdown, we actually ran a global design-a-thon, we called it, around a particular feature in one of our products, which, watch this space. But it was run across 3 different time zones, 4 or 5 different countries. We ended up about 40 of our staff, and you were part of it, and who formed teams. Every team had members from different parts of the organisation, cross-disciplinary, different languages, different backgrounds. And we got 7 submissions for what this thing could do from all different types of ideas. And I think, we got some great product ideas, right? But the bigger thing I think that you experienced is you got to know people, right? Way more than you could do in a formal meeting or a formal workshop and all that boring stuff that work's always been about. So I think as an engagement as a way to get people working together, it's really key. There's obviously the innovation creative side of it, that you might come up with some stuff that really transform your organisation. But the other thing I think it does, and the reason I think it works, and I said it earlier, is as we go through life, we sort of hit this phase in our schooling, sort of late primary type of level we think it happens at, and playfulness gets beaten out of you.
Yep.
Right? I know you ride a skateboard, Chris.
I do.
And a middle-aged man riding a skateboard, a lot of people go, why do you do that, right?
It's fun.
It's fun, right? You enjoy it. And I think in the workplace, if we can inject a little bit more fun and particularly playfulness is built on imagination, right? If we can unlock some of that, you unlock the intrinsic value of human capital, right? And in technology in particular, we spend so much time talking about how AI is going to take away take away jobs, how AI can do this or do that. You know the one thing AI will never do? It will never replace human feeling, human instinct, and the ability for humans to connect ideas together in really abstract ways, right?
Yep.
And so I think if you can, even if you don't need to be innovative or agile or whatever, right, I'd encourage every organisation listening to this to start doing this just to inject some playfulness back into the workplace. Because I think if you do that, and from what I've seen in many, many organisations, including our own, you'll get better human connection. People will learn to work together in different and better ways, which will drive better productivity when they work together. And you know what? They'll probably have a bit of fun. And as we've learnt from a lot of speakers on this event, they'll hopefully be happier because of that, and work will be a better place.
Yeah.
So I think it just underpins how you can make work a much better place to be.
Oh, look, I can vouch for that. My team was made up from someone from Ireland, Denmark, Switzerland, Australia, and the Netherlands, and we had a lot of fun going through this process. It was fantastic.
You also created a very long video.
We did. It was good fun. It was good fun. So, look, Simon, thanks for joining me this afternoon to talk about design thinking and creating that great video to share with everybody. An easy process, very engaging, delivers results.
No
Great stuff.
excuses. No excuses. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.